pages?
Such a good question. That's such a good question.
Yeah, that's such a good question.
Jake, all of your questions were excellent.
Jake, you were the best so far. Thank you.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
But I'm sort of curious as to whenever you take on these iconic roles that are a part of this masterpiece, how much it skews your perception of it if you were to go back and read it today. Like if you were to sit down with a copy of Sandman, even though we have the images in front of us, do you picture yourself and your fellow co-stars when you're thinking about the characters and turning the pages?
That's such a good question. That's such a good question.
Yeah, that's such a good question.
So I have read it again since we finished, and I don't picture myself. And I'll tell you why, because I think if you do an adaptation of a novel, of traditional novel in which you create all the images in your head, then it is very difficult to kind of, you can wipe to get rid of the images of the film that you've made or whatever. Whereas when you're looking at those extraordinary pieces of artwork, I don't think you kind of wipe off the face and put yours on. It would look kind of like this weird, creepy comedy Frankenstein situation. So no, I still see the classic images.
And I think because the classic images are so strong and so vivid and so beautiful, I'm like Tom, because I looked at them a lot since I've done the part, afterwards, during, and I mean, I recognise a lot of it from what we've done, but it's still very much the original source material that just can't be wiped because it's incredible.
Boyd, I got to say, you'll always be the Corinthian for me, man. I don't think I can ever see him without seeing you.
I'll take that as a compliment.
A very good one.
Yeah, I think, and also now Tom is I don't think I could ever not have Tom be Dream for me. He's so perfect for the role.
There is definitely a fusion in my mind, though, between Tom and Dream. As in, Dream and Dream, the comic Dream. There's
that's almost impossible now.
Yeah. There's definitely a certain crossover there.
If I was to read it again, I think I'd be able to have that separation with myself.
To me, they're still quite separate. I think that I take the show for what it is, which is a reimagining of the comics by Neil himself. We're so fortunate in this adaptation that the creator is directly involved. He hasn't been separated from his work. So this is Neil going, if I were to reimagine the Sandman now, what would it be? And so to me, it's almost like an evolution. It's not like, oh, these things don't match up anymore. It's like, I think now we have the comics, we have the audiobook, and we have this. And I think each of them kind of stand alone.
And that's the other thing is when I reread it after we did it, is what was really thrilling was remembering how accurately some of those frames were replicated and going like, oh my God, that looks exactly like what we shot. And that was so important to us when we were making it. We really did have it beside the camera at all times going like, is this an iconic one? Should we replicate it exactly? Or would it be more interesting to kind of to find a new world within it? And it was thrilling to do that.
It's crazy to think that Sandman originally hit the shelves over 30 years ago. So I'm curious, what's the biggest difference between the Neil Gaiman who wrote Sandman in the late 80s and the Neil Gaiman who's talking about the series today in 2022?
The biggest one is that the Neil Gaiman who's talking about the series now gets to look back at a 3,000-page story with a beginning, many middles and several ends that actually is one giant complete thing. And the Neil who started was a cocky 26, 27-year-old with an idea, massive self-confidence, much more than I have right now, and the conviction that maybe he could get really, really lucky and this thing that he wanted to tell would get told, but he also knew that the odds were so far against him that it probably wouldn't happen, but at least he was going to give it his shot.
Well, I think we're the ones that ended up lucky because we're the ones that got it. I'm curious for both of you guys. I'm so thankful for Netflix for this because this is a story that quite frankly needed to be a series. And I'm so glad it is. And I know there was a period of time where it was going to be a film. I'm curious, How would that have ever worked? Like, how would you have ever told this story?
Very, very badly. I mean, that was the problem with Sandman, was people went, okay, it's Sandman, it's a comic book. We know how to do, you do movies. You do big movies, and right now the big characters at DC, they've got Sandman, they've got Superman, they've got Batman, they've got the Flash, they've got Wonder Woman, they've got Sandman, so we do a Sandman movie. But then the problem was, well, you have 3,000 pages of story, and trying to squeeze that into a 2-hour movie meant that you wound up throwing away anything that made Sandman interesting and that made it work and that made it human. And you wound up with something that didn't mean anything. So that was what happened over and over again as Sandman scripts would get written. And eventually, David Goyer went to Warner Brothers and said, look, the only way to do Sandman that makes any kind of sense is to do it as the kind of TV show that people are making now, this giant novelistic television. Let's do the whole of Sandman, and let's ask Neil Gaiman to become involved. Every other version of Sandman, they've kept him at arm's length. Let's have Neil come in. And they said yes. So David Goyer came to me and I said yes. And then David went and found Allan, and Allan said, no, absolutely not. I don't want to be part of messing up Sandman. And David said, no, we're really going to do Sandman. It's not going to be a messed up Sandman. And Allan came and met me, and we had dinner. And 2 days later, the three of us were pitching our vision of Sandman with Warner's by our side to Netflix and all the other major streamers. And a week later, Netflix was the one who had stepped up and beaten all of the other streamers to Sandman.
I mean, because the thing that's so moronic about the idea of turning Sandman into a movie is that Sandman is it's a story about stories, quite literally. And the idea of trying to pull one story out of it and tell that in 2 hours is the antithesis to what it is. It's about, Dream isn't a protagonist. He's the host to the dreams of 1,000 different people. He's a guide. It's not about him. And as it progresses, and so to make it into some kind of here's a hero, king of dreams, and he's gonna kill Lucifer movie I would have burnt the cinema down. With no one in it. No one would have been in it. No one would have been in it. It would have just been the celluloid. I would have told everyone to leave. It would have been very safe. The safest arsenal ever.
I think it allowed us the anthology nature, which is absolutely what this series needs. It's each episode focusing on a different comic book that we could really tell that story instead of having to. I can't imagine a world of them melding together. It meant we could treat each world and realm and episode as an individual film and feel very different, which I think is one of the beauties in terms of traveling through the show.
Allan, I've got to ask you this. The only thing I love more than a great series, and I'm a pop culture junkie, it's why I think I have the greatest job in the world. I love a great series that knows when to wrap it up. This is an epic story. I mean, whenever someone tells me about a show and they're like, yeah, they're on season 18 by now, I'm like, I can't do it. Better, more difficult than knowing how to get this thing started. How do you know when it's time to look at the end of the Sandman story and go, okay, it's time to, around here is a good season to wrap it up?
Well, I mean, the source material tells us, it dictates that this story definitely has an ending.
Sure.
And, there are lots of ways that we could, there are death miniseries we'd love to explore doing. There are other characters worthy of having their own adventures who we would love to follow into those. But the thing that's so unique and remarkable about Sandman, even in its original comic book form, was that it was a story with an ending. No comic books had endings before Sandman. None. Even Alan Moore's Swamp Thing would just become someone else's Swamp Thing at a certain point. But I think you were the first person who basically, DC Comics canceled Sandman when Neil Gaiman was done writing it. And that never happened at that point in time. There were a lot of firsts with Sandman as a comic.
And it's one of only 4 graphic novels that have ever been on the New York Times bestsellers list. I believe it's Sandman, Dark Knight Returns, Mouse, and Watchmen. I'm curious as to why you guys, like, what is it? What is the common thread? Oh, they're giving me the wrap. Sorry.
Yep. Sorry, Jake.
They're jumping in. Guys, I had 1,000 more questions for you, unfortunately, but seriously,
Jake,
I
all of your questions were excellent.
Jake, you were the best so far. Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate you. Thank you, guys. It's an honor. Thank you so much. Something I found out I thought was really interesting is that only 4 graphic novels have ever made it onto the New York Times bestsellers list. It's Watchmen, Mouse, The Dark Knight Returns, and this one, and The Sandman. I'm sort of curious, what do you think is the common thread between those 4 titles? Like, what is it about them that kind of elevated them beyond comic book stores and kind of allowed mass audiences to see them not just as comic books, but as an actual literature?
Oh, God.
I mean, what connects them? I mean, I feel like they're all relatively dark tales, which is weird. Those are the best sellers. I mean, the thing that is, I mean, I don't know. I'm one of the biggest fans in the universe of Sandman. I haven't read Watchmen. I've read The Dark Knight Returns. Yeah, I kind of constantly I'm using the phrase graphic novel when referring to Sandman, but actually I don't think of it as a graphic novel. I think of it as an extraordinary work of art. And I think that's the reason it got to the New York Times bestseller list, because it breaks the boundaries of what we think can be achieved with this medium. And it's beyond the novel, it's beyond a piece of cinema, it's a masterpiece.
I think that's something that every single individual on the planet goes through. We all have this sort of surreal waking and dreaming life that we don't really have too many answers for, and we all can have that and relate to that. So I think it's something that is a very simple concept on the page, but has this really deep wealth of characters and worlds that can just go on and on and on.
So I've read 2 of those 4, but obviously seen adaptations of 3 of those 4. And I would say that the common thread is something that is, I think it's very, very difficult to sort of impart knowledge, or even sort of like, I think it's very easy for something to become very preachy when you are dealing with really big ideas and dealing with, you're dealing with issues in our society, you're dealing with psychology and sociology and things like that. And I think that the way in is either comics or comedy. I think those are like the ways in, and they're the ways to sort of reach people in a way that they take it on. And though it may seem like it's so surface, it just stays with you for such a long time. And I think that if you look at all of those comics, they're dealing with huge ideas and huge things that affect all of us as human. Like, they're essentially these like, they're like weirdly almost like the way the Bible is, like the way it's meant to deal with everything. There's huge concepts that they have boiled down into comic books. Like, I just think it's so, it reaches such a mass audience in a way that you wouldn't if it was just like literature.
It's also standing the test of time.
Yeah.
It's what's so interesting about Neil himself saying, they were also they've been such a slow burn, and a slow burn throughout is because there's something, I think, timeless about it. And even though we have a redrafted, reimagined version of the Sandman, is absolutely the Sandman that you see in the source material, and it's still absolutely universal and completely relevant today.
I think I haven't gotten a chance to read the other titles that you mentioned, but with the Sandman, I feel, it deals with a lot of topics. It deals with a lot of things that, a lot of the questions that people ask themselves, and it puts a really interesting spin on them. I love the concept, itself, of all these beings, all these, not personifications, but just or rather the anthropomorphic personification of all of these concepts, death and desire, destiny. I think, first of all, it's just an interesting concept to begin with. And I love it because it explores every human's personal relationship with it explores our relationship with death and with dreams and with desire, and it puts these beings in almost like a place of service to humanity, and like how they service humanity. We see with Death and the sound of her wings, Morpheus goes with her on her job. He spends the day with her, and he sees her, taking the souls and like escorting them to wherever they need to go, or at least, taking them out of their bodies. And I think it's just it's a thing that everyone's able to delve into, and to see their questions be answered, or to see their ponderings be expounded upon. I think it's just, it gives you a good think. And I think some of, the scenes are comforting. I read a lot of people talking about how they would love someone like, this version of Death to escort them, if they were to die, when they die. It provides comfort, and I think it provides, a lot of brain food, and just, you're able to relate to it because your questions are kind of presented, and you're just like, yeah, I was wondering about that too. It's something that everyone can relate to, and I think ultimately the Sandman is a reflection of humanity. It's a story about humanity, and it kind of shows us ourselves, and I think that's what people resonate with.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.